Slater with IVRS, who is working with me behind the scenes to learn the Adobe platform so that she can help David manage the webinars while I'm away on maternity leave. So thanks to Kathy for helping do this and learning this sometimes difficult and unruly system. In order to, again, ensure that everyone can hear, I asked if you call in by phone to please mute yourself by hitting the mute feature on your phone or, again, *#. We'll be sure to share the recording and the materials after the webinar. I'll send those out. But Rachel's presentation will also be available on the last page or the last pod of the webinar. In the lower left-hand corner, you'll be able to download her presentation straight from there. Okay, I think I covered all that. So I'm really excited to introduce to you our speaker and presenter for today. I'm going to go ahead and, sorry, I'm going to mute somebody. Give me just a minute. All right. So I had the pleasure of meeting Rachel Pollock back at the beginning of this year, right before we started the project in D.C., and so did a couple other Iowans, and we knew right away that Rachel was a great fit for us. Rachel is the Chief Operating Officer of JobPath, Inc., a not-for-profit agency in New York that provides integrated employment services and supports for people with developmental disabilities and a range of individualized day and residential supports. She has extensive experience in the implementation of individualized employment services with a particular focus on new program development and the effective use of funding streams to develop quality programming. She has overseen the launch and expansion of customized employment services at JobPath, as well as services specifically designed for individuals on the autism spectrum. In collaboration with Mark Golden Associates, JobPath's employment team, Rachel has provided technical assistance to other provider agencies in the New York metropolitan area, and most recently was instrumental in the development of a consortium for customized employment, a coalition of agencies and employers in New York working together to share training, resources, and various employment opportunities. Rachel has a law degree from New York University School of Law, and again is just very delightful, and we're excited to have her. So thanks again, Rachel, for coming to Iowa today and sharing all your knowledge. And the floor is yours.
Great. I also am very excited to be involved in this webinar. I really am excited about the subject of thinking about community pre-vocational services and really making those programs that sing and are really wonderful adjuncts to employment. So what I would like to focus on today is community pre-vocational and day services, which may be day habilitation services, as a true pathway to employment. That means not just that they are helping us integrate people in the community, and not that they're as an alternative to employment, but while we're looking for employment and once people have employment, finding a way of using this to structure people's days so that they will continue to further their employment efforts, as well as making real connections in the community. So that's going to be the focus of what I'm really interested in talking about. I know that all of us, I also, as you can tell from the introduction, am a part of a provider organization. And these are real challenges for us to think every day thoughtfully about how to make these programs really work for people to move them ahead in employment and confidence. So first I wanted to sort of focus on the benefits of wraparound programs as a complement to employment initiatives. And some of these are obvious and we all think about them, but I think it's good to remind ourselves of why we really are looking for these wraparound services for people. One is as a launching off point for employment. So what can we do within those programs to further employment? An opportunity for integration in the community, regardless of whether it's leading to employment, because we also want to get people involved in their communities. The structure and security during the job search is really, really important, and I think that sort of keys into the fifth prong that I talk here about needs of family or residential service providers. There is, while we're looking for employment, there is a lot of concern among families and the people who are providing support services to people residentially to make sure that people are safe and secure during the day. And then even when people find employment, how are we going to provide structure for the hours when the person's not working if we're not able or they're not ready, if we're not able to find them a full-time opportunity at that time? I do think the aim is as much as to get people working for as many hours as possible, but we're working in a real world where we have to deal with the fact that we may not be able to find people employment as much and as soon as we want. I'm thinking we want to think about this on the background of what are my discussion in the background of what are sort of the traditional kinds of community pre-vocational activities that are possible. And I'm not going to focus on all of these, but I did want to go through just touch a little bit on some of the areas that I'm not going to talk about because I think you will all be able to be to do these and to think about these as easily as I am. Job exploration, job shadowing, resume writing, interviewing skills. These are all things that are important parts of a community pre-voc program. Role-playing, workplace etiquette. But what I'm really going to focus in here are more on the community-based activities and how to structure those in a way that are going to advance employment as much as possible. So that I'll be focusing more on volunteering, the pros and cons of volunteering, how to structure volunteering in an effective way, paid and unpaid internships, and somewhat about training. We can also look at the background of very common day habilitation activities because some programs will be community-based pre-voc programs and some may be common community day hab activities. And the array of day hab activities can be a little bit different. It will also involve more artistic activities, sports and recreational activities, again, volunteer work, clubs based on interests. And all of these, again, are activities that we may want to continue as part of structuring people's days. And what I'm going to try to pull out are the types of things that are really going to also help people advance employment, with the focus on thinking about pulling out as many of those possible and making programs as filled with those kinds of activities as possible. So when I think about how to structure these programs towards employment, I try to pull out the elements that are really going to support an employment goal. The first one is creating connections with organizations that might really have employment opportunities. And in approaching partners for volunteer work or for classes, it's really thinking about, is this an organization that's really open to integrating someone with a disability? And in particular, might there be employment opportunities? Having people volunteer or be involved where they can develop their own individual relationship with the supervisor or colleague, so that even if there's not going to be an employment opportunity, that they're creating the references, the recommendations, the personal interactions that are going to help them build confidence, but also maybe giving them a reference for a future opportunity. Something that's going to help the person explore new interests or expand on existing interests. The reason I focus on that in particular is that one of the things that we do in discovery with customized employment is we really try to play on people's interests and use those as jumping off points for employment and for creating a nexus with employers. So the more we can help people develop new interests and expand on interests, the more threads there are going to be for our employment efforts. The fourth one, develop skills directly related to work. I think that one's obvious, encouraging confidence. And then have within any program that you're developing a range of options that will match different in people's individual interests, abilities, and needs. So the more diversity you can have, the more you're going to be able to tap into the interests that match individuals. And then any program you'll want to have based as much as possible on knowledge about individuals and their choices, and that's where some type of discovery process that will be related to, maybe related to the employment discovery process as well. And anyone who knows anything about customized employment, the basis of customized employment is a discovery process. I suspect that you've had a lot of training on that, but we can talk more about that if there are questions about that. Key questions to ask ourselves as we are thinking about these developing these programs or expanding these programs is how do we ensure that the activities help people move towards employment, and I just discussed a little bit of the program elements for that. How can we individualize opportunities and experiences within a group program and group funding? And I think this is very key. I am going to really advocate for services that are as individualized as possible, but again, we're in a real world, and each organization, each provider, each state has different realities that they're dealing with in terms of funding. And so we should really be thinking about and pushing ourselves to find the best way to individualize within the constraints that we're working with. And then the more general question of how do we support people to become part of their communities, which is an underlying question for all the work that we're trying to do. And then some key strategies that, as we're talking about the individual case situations and stories I'm going to talk about, is think about integrating some type of discovery type process into all the work that we're doing with all the individuals. Develop community partnerships. That's key to doing really quality work. Having staff that are really focused on developing community partnerships is really important. And then focusing on building confidence, skills, and interests. So those are things that I and our staff here at JobPath keep in mind as we're developing these possibilities for people. And then one of the most important things is this is fun work, and I encourage everyone to, despite the challenges in making it work, step back and say, how can we all have fun doing this? Because the outcomes are wonderful, and the celebration of people's progress in employment, but also in just confidence and getting out in the community is a lot of fun. And having staff and who know how to have fun with it is key to the effort. The first area that I'd like to focus on is volunteer work and internships and how they can work within a community-based program to help lead towards employment, whether indirectly or directly. So this is Jack, and Jack was a man who actually lived for the younger part of his life in one of the institutions in New York State, and then was lucky enough as part of the deinstitutionalization to have first a group home and then an individual home apartment that he now lives in, and has been part of JobPath's day program for quite a long time. And one of what we were able to match him with was through exploration of his interest in animals, we found a local pet store not far from his neighborhood that not only was a pet store but also had a not-for-profit component in domesticating feral cats or stray cats. And for a number of years, Jack was very involved in doing volunteer work for that organization that, again, was very specifically based on his interest. When our job developers became involved, and we actually had a wonderful source of funding for a while that allowed us to do some very intensive job developing and did discovery, they discovered that he was doing this volunteer work and worked with the then volunteer organization to look at the task that he was already doing, which was he was actually had a very calming influence on the cats, and his support worker would help him put them underneath his neck, and because he didn't have use of his arms, and he would have a very calming influence on them. But then they developed a set of tasks where he would tell customers about the cats, and now is also doing some fundraising as well. And so that is a volunteer job that was so connected to his interest, where he was able to create real connections with the owner and manager of the store, and is now working a paid job there. The more we tie these volunteer opportunities to real interests and real skills and abilities of the individual, the more likely we are that they're going to turn into paid employment. This is Ruben, and Ruben, before he came to JobPath, was at a school for individuals with visual impairments, continued through our connection with the school after his graduation to volunteer with younger students who were in that school playing music. Here he's playing using a drum, but he also does keyboard and sings songs to the students. He was doing that for quite a few years. We tried to develop that particular volunteer job volunteer position into a job. We were not able to do that because they just did not have the funding. But again, as part of our employment efforts, he is now working at a preschool for students without disabilities, playing music, using the repertoire of songs he's developed, the skills he's developed at engaging with young people. It's a wonderful opportunity for him. It's also a wonderful opportunity for the preschool students who he spends time with. They not only enjoy his company, he's an incredibly delightful man, but they also have an opportunity to ask him questions about how he navigates and how he gets around. And it's a very open, wonderful communication for them, and a terrific employment opportunity for him. Again, coming out of really focusing on his individual strengths and interests. And capitalizing on the volunteer work that he was already doing. This young man, as full disclosure, this is actually my son. He is a young man with high-functioning autism. We were able to use day services in an interesting assortment of ways for Alex. First, we were able to use the day services to support him in college. He independently was able to get into a local college, but needed more support than he would be able to get from the college itself. So Dayhab was useful in helping him develop his academic skills and his analytic skills, and as well as helping him to become more comfortable in the community. Then over one of his summers, our staff developed an unpaid internship with a group, a for-profit that was providing video equipment and space for people who were for organizations that were making film. It was a good fit for him because he has a lot of interest in theater and music. The unpaid internship showed them that he was extremely hardworking and focused. When he graduated 5 months later, and he continued to do a little bit of volunteer work in the last 6 months of his school, and then we were able to use a very interesting paid internship program that I'll describe in a minute that the state of New York created, where he was able to stay on the payroll of the state while he received additional training and support from our staff to develop a set of skills that the employer could use based on some of the strengths that he already had. The interesting thing about the paid internship is it's a paid internship that is paid by the state for employers who have a good faith belief that after a fairly short training period of about 6 months to 8 months, that they can foresee being able to put the person on their own payroll. That program initially had started where they were giving employers about 18 months, and that was not working because employers were much more able to project and say, of course I can put someone on payroll after 18 months, but it wasn't happening. That kind of paid internship program, it has been for us a very useful tool as an outgrowth of the day services programs to turn some of our volunteer opportunities into jobs. And this is Taylo, and she also used a paid internship to get a job. And what I wanted to focus on with Taylo is, if you see her here, she is concentrating on doing some work at a print shop. Taylo had been in school, and right after school had been in a paid internship that was geared towards light maintenance work in a number of settings not related to her interest. And she was having a lot of behavioral problems and focus issues. We were able to develop a paid internship at this print shop where her interest in art came together with her real abilities to do light maintenance work. And she is their go-to person, helping all the artists in this print shop, doing their cleanup, preparation work, and she gets time to, as well, before and afterwards, to do some of her own art. So it's a wonderful combination, and it's a reminder to us that in thinking about what will work for people, just like as we do with ourselves, we really want to focus on an environment that plays into people's interests. So again, steps to meaningful volunteer work, a discovery process, and that can be a team effort of direct support workers, managers, and the individual. I can't stress enough the importance of bringing our direct support workers into the work so that they really develop an understanding of the joy of making these connections. And then reminder that this discovery process can be a dual process for both discovery of community activities and employment. And so we can think of our services as braided services where they can work together and use discovery to work for both. There are many other tools available out there for planning for individuals. We've had here at JobPath a connection for a long time with Beth Mount and John O'Brien. Jack and Linda Pierpoint are in Toronto, have a lot of expertise that they can offer, and lots of books about person-centered planning. There are many, many other people out there who do person-centered planning within the day services, not employment. Mark Gold and Associates has developed a community calendar, which is a kind of an outgrowth of the discovery process geared to more community activities, and you can always draft your own. The important thing is a planning process that does involve some observation of individuals, not just asking people questions, but watching what they're doing, watching what's meaningful to them in their own lives. I want to switch gears for a moment and for a little while, and talk about the group experience and group volunteer work. I have been focusing on individual volunteer opportunities because, of course, that's the most ideal. That's where, going back to those elements that I discussed, that's where you're going to be able to create individual connections and individual opportunities. But that may not always be a possibility. A scenario that I want to throw out for us to think about, which is a pretty standard scenario that we see in group programs here, is a scenario where you might have 6 people with disabilities doing clerical work at a large not-for-profit. In this case, the one I'm thinking of is a not-for-profit that develops housing for low-income people. I'm aware of a particular situation where this happened, where all these 6 people came and worked together in a conference room, somewhat separated from the other staff because it was in a conference room that was where other people were working in cubicles around the office. There was daily contact with an office manager or a clerical assistant from the organization, and there was support from a lead support worker with experience in task analysis and teaching skills. My question is how we evaluate the quality of this experience. And I have some suggestions of how to think about this. Does it pass muster with federal and state labor laws? And that's obviously an important base question here. It's a not-for-profit. Under federal law, it very well may, and you will want to do your own analysis, but you'll want to look under your own state labor laws and make sure that any volunteer opportunity is going to match that. Think about, are the individuals gaining new skills, or are they continuing to do the same skill over and over again, but for volunteer work, not employment? What additional skills are they learning, or could they learn? How much contact do they really have with the not-for-profit staff? If they're in a conference room and they're not involved on a regular basis where their work is being evaluated one-on-one by somebody who's part of that not-for-profit organization, we should begin to wonder whether they are really integrated and really getting an opportunity to show their own stuff. And then how connected is the work with that particular person's interests and passions. The reason I'm focusing on this particular scenario is that in my early days of doing employment work, I had a very interesting experience. I was learning customized employment. I was trying to get as many placements as we could and thinking through my own internal Rolodex of people I knew. And I knew the executive director of this particular organization who had a special needs son. And I approached him and I said, we sat down and I talked to him about our great program. And he looked at me and said, well, why should I employ someone? I have, 6 people coming in every day and doing the work as a volunteer opportunity. It was a very sad story for me, and I processed it and I thought about it. But I think we can structure these group volunteer activities, but we should think about if we need to work in group situations, which we may have to for the funding, how can we structure these group volunteer activities so that the individuals really stand out and can really make their own connections? So some suggestions is thinking about creating partnerships with a not-for-profit or community group of a size large enough to have multiple workstations so that people can work individually with the staff of the organizations and develop their own relationships. And a partnership with an organization that understands what our goals are. Give individuals choices about their activities, having enough group volunteer activities, if that's the way we're going to go, where we're able to match them with people's choices as much as possible. Matching individuals with those particular departments. So one-on-one as much as possible with perhaps a staff person taking on the role of shuttling between workstations. Those are just some suggestions about how we can make a group situation really work for people. And the next area is we work with a lot of people who have artistic interests, and we can think about how those artistic interests can help develop confidence, abilities, threads of interest that also will help with employment. Again, this will not be instead of employment, and it's probably useful to have it as part of an array of other services that are individualized, but thinking about what kinds of group experiences in artistic activities and how those artistic activities can help further the attributes that people have that are going to help them thrive in employment. Before I get to the more group situation, I want to also mention that we often will find individual kinds of opportunities for people to engage in an individual internship, an individual class that will further their artistic interests and may help lead towards employment. We worked with one young man who was very involved in fairy tale theater in New York City when he was in school, and he continued that volunteer work, which was volunteer work that everybody did. Everybody in the theater troupe was a volunteer, whether they had disabilities or not. And after he graduated, that volunteer activity turned into a job. We developed a set of tasks with that theater company that involved doing clerical work and set up for that company. So those individual opportunities, creative opportunities, can work as well. But what I wanted to talk about here is the group activities that may help people develop abilities and attitudes that can help them in employment. So this is at JobPath, we've recently created a theater troupe, and started as a theater group and now really is a theater troupe. And what I wanted to emphasize about this, and what I feel is so unique, and again, it's part of a larger group of array of activities, is that this is a cooperative theater group that's facilitated by a consultant. It is not led by a consultant. And the role of facilitator is important, because this is a group where people feel like they have ownership of it, and as a result of that sense of ownership and teamwork, they are developing a set of abilities and social abilities and confidence that is really making a difference for them. Many of the people in this theater group, as I look at this group, a number of them are working, and some of them had jobs before, and some have developed jobs while they've been participating in the theater group. But some of the examples are, one of the women in the group in her 30s has had a tendency to not challenge herself and to feel very fragile, and then back out of situations where she could move ahead and really invest herself. And she is part of this theater group, and when they began to start practicing for a performance that they are going to be doing actually in a few weeks, she was not learning her lines. She was not following through on the responsibilities that she had taken on as part of this team. And her colleagues, her peers in the theater group, called her on it and said, "You can't continue if we can't rely on you." And she went off in a huff, and then processed it with the facilitator, and is back and has learned her lines, and is as part of the team following through on all of those responsibilities. Those are learning lessons that we all learn as young people that help us to know how to thrive in the workplace. Another young man had a very, very hard time speaking up for himself, and through the self-expression in the theater group has now become an advocate for himself and a major leader in the group. A third young man gets very defensive when he gets feedback, and through the work with this theater troupe, he is getting used to thinking of feedback as a way of getting better and of participating in a more effective way as part of a team. So all of those, if it's structured, and what's important about one of the things that the facilitator of the group told me is that she's also involved in a more traditional theater class in an organization that works with people with disabilities, and all of the questions are in that other traditional class are all being fielded to her rather than the group. And what's so unique about what she has structured here is the team effort here, and the feeling that she is a facilitator and this belongs to that group. And that does set the environment in a similar way than you will find in an employment setting where people are participating as part of a team and taking ownership for their responsibilities. We've also developed a poetry group that functions in a similar way. Again, it is a facilitated group where the group decides their own goals and works as a team, thinks out what they want to do, and then participates in poetry festivals that they have to actually apply for, as any other poetry group in New York City would have to apply for. So here they are in Governor's Island at a New York City Poetry Festival. They got wonderful feedback, and this is the group at a local bookstore, and the poetry reading was one of the various readings the local bookstore presented to people in the community. Again, the initial intent of this group was to have members with and without disabilities in partnership with a local settlement house. That's ideal. Currently, this particular group is only with disabilities. The one member at the settlement house, an older gentleman, is no longer doing it because the group actually had to move to a different location. But if one can create a group that is inclusive of people with and without disabilities, that's even more ideal. Again, it's a collaboration run by members, and they're doing performances in the community. That all of those are things that are related to the kinds of skills that people will have in employment. I want to emphasize as I'm talking about this that these are not in any way prerequisites. We should still be assuming that people can develop all of those abilities on a job and in customized employment. I always focus on finding a job for people based on who they are at the time, and we can do that. But while we are doing that, we can continue to help people move and develop more and more skills for employment. And even if they have jobs, continuing to help them, as we always help ourselves in our own lives, to become better and better team players, and take more and more initiative in our lives. Similar interests and classes, if we think about them very individually and we pull out the threads, can also be wonderful ways of moving towards employment. We had one man who had a membership at a fitness center. He actually got the membership in exchange for bartering providing some assistance at the fitness center. He did this as part of his day activities. He was not able to get a job at that fitness center, but learned so much about the work that he now is working in another fitness center. Another man was entranced by a Hollywood-themed restaurant, spent a lot of time talking to the people at that restaurant, going to the restaurant, and was able to turn that into a job helping to publicize the themes at the restaurant. People can participate in a range of classes that develop skills in the community, and that can be individually. That can also be as a small group, as long as it's related to people's interests. And as I mentioned before, college attendance, both for credit and not for credit, can develop skills, abilities. In New York, we've actually used day habilitation to help people take GED classes. That may be particular to the New York area, where people get IEP diplomas, individual employment diplomas, in our special needs schools that are not translatable into a real high school diploma, and some of them are able to do GED classes and use that as a real plus in their resumes. The last model I wanted to discuss is a model that we've just developed at JobHaz in the last year and a half. We call it Urban Innovations. It's a model that is based on very much in neighborhoods and based on citizen participation. It is one of the reasons I wanted to discuss it is very conducive to group funding. What we've created in Harlem, which is a uptown neighborhood in New York, is a community within a community. We have 2 provider agencies participating with with about 15 people all together. We have a small hub at a neighborhood community center, so the actual space that we use is rented from a community center along with space rented by many other community organizations. People are participating as individuals in a range of activities in the neighborhood or in small groups of 2 to 4 individuals. Again, it depends on the provider agency. There are JobPath and another provider agency. JobPath's funding is very individualized. The other agency's funding is more group-oriented. So in what way people are able to participate depends to a degree on the particular agency. We have a group facilitator, a resource developer who develops partnerships with other community groups to find those activities that relate to people's interests. The group together, this Urban Innovations Group, who think of themselves as an entity, they spearhead citizen projects, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So they create their own contribution to the community. They co-sponsor community events and festivals with other community groups. And there is a lot of participation in classes, volunteer work, and community activities. This is 2 young men who are part of this citizen project, this project that's been spearheaded. The resource developer for the project realized that there was a real need to focus on literacy and opportunities for reading in the community, particularly among children, and created a project where this Urban Innovations Group is sponsoring little free libraries in local parks in conjunction with volunteer citizen action groups in those parks. They are having a lot of contact with the community groups who they're co-sponsoring this with. They are involved with the local libraries where they're picking up books that are no longer going to be part of the circulation in the library. They help build these cute little huts where they have the books, and they've been reading to children in the parks. They're called stewards of the library, so they, as part of their community activity in the Harlem neighborhood, along with individual volunteer activities and classes, they take shifts and turns in stewarding these libraries, reading to children, working with the public libraries and the citizens groups to make this little libraries that are available to the whole community. There's participation in art classes as part of the community. They're completely inclusive art classes. Some of them are classes that exist in the community, and some of them are created along with other community groups to serve both people with and without disabilities. This is one of the community events that were co-sponsored. In the background are some of the people. You can see in the background here some of the people from JobPath who are engaged in activities at this. It was called a. It was a sort of a Harlem community outreach to let the Harlem community as a whole know about all the different organizations that were available, and the Urban Innovations Group participated as part of that. In terms of the group activities, the other organization, the other provider, was not able to do one-on-one activities, and they've created a model in which they have a support worker, very seasoned support worker, working with a small group of 4 individuals. Those 4 individuals used to be bused to a center-based program in downtown Manhattan and then would come back home to their uptown community. Instead, the support worker worked with each of them over time to travel from their homes to one established spot where they could all meet in Harlem. The group decides on a schedule of activities that takes account of all of their interests. So within that schedule, there are interests and volunteer activities that relate to each individual. And it's a range of activities, classes, volunteer work, the little free library, and it shifts over time to make sure that it's updated with people's interests and their skills as they change. I would add that to the extent that as we structure, if you use this model, that we add in as much one-to-one activity within the weekly schedule as well, and use our staff flexibly to do that, would be ideal. So this is just a sample schedule of some of the things that small group is doing. They volunteer together at a food pantry. They participate in dance classes in the neighborhood. There's a crochet class that's co-sponsored by Urban Innovations and a community organization. So that was created together. They're helping to steward the free library, and they've also participated in a Photoshop class. Again, the range of activities is based on their interests, the interests of the group as a whole. And they actually talk together and meet together and develop that together, so that with the goal of making sure that everybody's interests are represented. I'm very aware of the issues. We're all very aware of the issues that we need to focus on, and as we're thinking about developing these community-based programs and expanding them, so staffing, key to doing really good community-based work is making sure that we have some amount of resource development staff so that we can develop those partnerships and individual opportunities. Sometimes it feels like a expensive investment, but in the end it is the most meaningful investment I think we can make. Really developing staff expertise in travel training. That's going to be particularly important when we talk about families and their responses to activities becoming more community-based, really giving families that security. There is, as we are trying to match individual volunteer work, individual activities with group activities, there's a lot of scheduling. It can be quite complicated. And we're actually we're finally developing an electronic record system here, and one of the ways we selected it was an electronic record system that had a really good scheduling component to it, because the scheduling can be a nightmare, but it's really worth it because it makes a real difference in the quality of people's experience. And then I think that we haven't done this so much because our employment work has always been a leader in the work that we do. But as a day program, as people are transforming their efforts, some of the day programs that we've been talking with here in New York are developing actual liaisons between the day services team and the employment team that ensures that employment remains the goal, and ensures that some of those, that there's a lot of interaction between the employment team and the day services team, so that those volunteer opportunities that can turn into employment do turn into employment. Talking with families, I know that's a concern for all of us. It's the best I can say is explaining your goals for the program, tapping into people's hopes for their children. As a mother of a child with a disability, despite all of the anxieties, we all do see the possibilities in our children as well. And the more you can give concrete examples of how that particular child can flourish in not only employment but in a more community-based setting, the better. I have actually a friend who came to JobPath with a son who has quite significant autism, and when I started talking with her about employment, she said, but he doesn't understand money. It's not going to make any difference to him. And I said, it can make a difference, because he'll be taken more seriously if he's part of an employment team at an actual business. And now, 4 years down the road, her son is working a small number of hours a week at a local bookstore. And if you asked her now, she would say, well, of course that was right, because he has a real connection now with his employer. And that doesn't mean we can't do it through volunteer work, but the best way for people to become part of their communities is through employment. But even even as we're developing volunteer opportunities, keeping families in the loop, getting their input is incredibly important. And particularly with things like travel training, as we're working with people to learn how to travel, it's so important to communicate the progress to families so that they can see it and believe it. Funding is actually the area that I'm really most fascinated about and interested in. I know that you're going to have some separate presentations on that, but it's really important to think about having funding that's sufficient not only to cover the face-to-face activities, but non-face-to-face activities. And that may be just making it part of a rate or allowing some amount of billing for non-direct activities, but that resource development and partnership development is so important. Smaller units of service enables people to develop more natural supports. The aim for so much of this work should be to phase out support as much as we can, because that, again, allows people more of the community connection and allows us to put resources for the people and the supports for the people who need it the most. The funding for paid internships has been very, very useful for us, and I think to the extent that as states and as providers we can think about developing some ability to do these paid internships. Employers take them very seriously, and it is an opportunity to provide training in for-profit businesses, which may be less likely to want to do volunteer work because of labor laws. And I'd also say, which I don't have on this list, but I've been thinking about a lot, is finding incentives for providers to do individualized work, and to the extent that we can have different rates for individualized work than group work, that can be helpful in making it more of it possible for providers to do individualized work. And then transportation, which particularly in more rural areas, is always going to be a challenge, and that is not a challenge that we have in the same way in New York. We're very lucky to have a public transportation system that's very rich. But I have been thinking a lot about this because we ourselves provide mentoring support to areas of the state that do not have those kinds of rich resources. And, we talked about travel training. Staff can pick up a small number of people and then work with them together. Really getting families to buy and other service providers to buy into it. We had one residential provider who made it a point to get somebody who was in our employment program to a library where he could do volunteer work, and nobody actually believed that he could work fairly independently in any setting, and his work at that library gave him confidence, and he's now working at a job in the city at a not-for-profit here. Partnerships with other service systems. I think it's very useful to think about micro-enterprises for stay-at-home parents where they might be able to, during the 9 to 3 hours where their children are in school, provide transportation. That's one way to think about it. So I think we all as a community want to be as creative as possible in thinking about how to tap into other resources in the community that can help us with that particular need. In closing, just some final thoughts. I like to think of the work we're doing not as a program so much as thinking of it as, or services, but as an incubator for launching people's hopes and dreams that is connected to my balloons in my earlier slide about really having fun with this and helping the people that we're working with to have fun with it. I think it's really essential to be creative in individualizing services even within the small group settings that we may have to do for funding reasons. And then I can't emphasize them as enough, just keeping our eye on that employment goal. This community-based community-based services are opportunities for people to integrate, opportunities for people to try out new interests, but they should we want it always to be in service of moving people towards employment. Particularly in the United States, we're a very work-oriented society, and aside from the obvious benefits of asset development and independence, it is the best way for people to integrate in the community. And I don't have a lot more time left, but I'd love to take any questions.
Perfect. Thanks, Rachel. We did have a couple come in.
Okay, great.
Jen asked a great question, funding piece, as it relates to, and hopefully she'll clarify if I don't get this quite right, but discovery as a dual process or any of those assessment and planning, like the person-centered planning or the community calendar, the things that involve observation. She's wanting to know what the funding looks like for that. Was that like pre-voc through Medicaid and or through voc rehab? Kind of what does that look like?
Right, and it can look either way, and we've done it both ways. We, through our voc rehab, we've been able in the past to have fairly some good funding for discovery, and our state DD agency here recently has put discovery in as part of sort of intensive employment supports from the Developmental Disability Employment Funding. But we've also done it, and you can do it, and a lot of organizations are doing it through pre-voc funding or day hab funding. Staff can spend time observing people in the community, doing the one-to-one observations. Some of the discovery is looking at what people are doing, but also trying some new activities with them and seeing their response to that. And that can be done through pre-voc and day hab funding. So the real challenge is just looking at all your funding sources and saying, okay, what do we have available to do that, and braid them together so that you can do that. You can actually use your pre-voc or day hab funding to do the discovery that's helpful for employment as well as for individual volunteer work, because it's all leading in the same direction. So I think it's a range, and it'll depend on what's available to you.
Perfect, thank you. And the last one that came in was in regards to the electronic system that you talked about that's under development.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that system is, or a little bit more about that?
I can tell you some. It's actually one of the few things that I've not been very involved in here. I've delegated it. But the system is called Metasced, and all of the billing is based on a schedule that's created for each person. And because of that, our staff really believes that they can use that scheduling component to be able to really mix and match people's schedules. So although it's going to be helpful for the billing, it's also going to be helpful for keeping track of people's schedules, so that all staff who are working with the individual, whether they're employment or day, can look at that schedule and actually make changes in the schedule there to sort of see how it all pieces together. So the particular one is called Metasced. It's not just New York-based, but I believe there are other ones too, and it's just a matter of picking the one that's going to help your billing in the way you need it, but also be useful for this. And it doesn't have to be done electronically. For years, we've been doing it not electronically, and we have the way we structured our day services. We have coordinators, and with caseloads of about 10 to 12 people, and their job is not only to find activities, but to keep track of those of all the staff and all the scheduling. But it's pretty labor intensive. We're hoping that this will help a little bit.
Thank you. Wonderful. Just a wealth of great information today, Rachel, and a lot of the things that you addressed today are things that we're hearing around the state that providers are really trying to figure out and piece together as they evolve and transform, and again try to meet some of those CMS guidelines that are.
That's right. Yeah.
So I think you really addressed a lot of great things with the models and the ideas. So we really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I really welcome, people follow, as you're thinking about it. I know we needed to go through all this pretty quickly, and I wanted to have a lot of different ideas in there for people to use as launching off points. So what's wonderful about this work is when we present ideas, it spawns other ideas, and I'd love to hear what other people are piloting and to tell you any more that you might need to know or want to think about. I'm happy to talk with anybody who's doing it. It's great work and fun.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks for offering that, because I was actually going to ask, if folks have more questions or ideas as this kind of marinates for them, if they can go ahead and send those in to me and I can forward them on to you.
Sure.
I'd be happy to do that. Great.
And my contact information is there too, so I'm really happy to. I really enjoy talking to people, and I enjoy learning from everybody about how to do it better, because our particular situation actually is we've been individualized, and we're going to have to try to be a little bit more group oriented. So we're always thinking about how to do this work effectively, cost effectively, and really move people's lives forward.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that's exactly what Iowa's providers are thinking about too, those same things.
Great.
So I appreciate that. Yeah, and your contact information is there in the presentation, which we'll send out, but I'll also include that in the body of the email that goes out to everybody, along with your presentation. We're going to go ahead and open up the polls now. If you could please give us your feedback on the webinar today, we'd really appreciate it. It's always helpful. And again, I'll make sure to send everything out before the week's over, including the presentation, the contact information, the transcript, and the recording. And again, thanks to Rachel for joining us today and sharing all this great information. And we'll see everybody again in June for the second part of this series of high-performing community-based pre-vocational services and day services. And we'll have Iowa's very own Leanne Moskowitz join us that day. So look for more information to come on that. And thanks again for joining us.